Hi, good morning. Pleasure to be here today. I had a great, beautiful 3-hour drive down from Nashville yesterday. And I am going to focus my talk today on the PCORI-funded PCORnet, which is a national network that PCORI has funded to support comparative effectiveness research and pragmatic clinical trials. And for those that are not aware, about 18 months ago, PCORI awarded initially 11 sites as clinical data research networks. It's now up to 13 sites. And they also initially funded 18, which I think is now up to 20 sites that are funded as patient-powered research networks. And for the CDRNs in particular, our goal is that each CDRN needs to be able to identify 1 million or more patients across 2 or more health systems. We need to build infrastructure that allows the sharing of data, the building of novel informatics tools for identifying patients for research, and also to engage key stakeholders, which I think many of you might be aware is a key focus of all PCORI-funded research. And then, of course, all of this work is really to be able to perform comparative effectiveness and research and pragmatic clinical trials. So this is a list of the 11 initial CDRNs that were funded. And you can see from this list, it's a broad distribution across the country. And this is actually a map showing those 11 initial CDRNs. And the reach that those sites have. So you can see it really is a network designed to cover the country so that an investigator or other organization could come to PCORnet and potentially do a project that looks at data from really across the entire country or does a pragmatic clinical trial that could potentially engage patients from across the country. And as I mentioned, in addition to the now 13 CDRNs, PCORI also funded initially 18 PPRNs, or patient-powered research networks, and 9 of the initial 18 were in common or non-rare conditions. And you can see this includes one known as R-Power, which is focused on arthritis that's led by Seth Ginsburg, Ben Knoll, who are here today, I believe, yes, and also Jeff Curtis for UAB, and I'm going to talk a little bit about their work and our relationship with them. But they also funded 9 PPRNs in rare conditions, and I think this is an area that PCORI and PCORnet is particularly excited about, because with this large national network of electronic health record data that we're building, we really do have a great opportunity to identify patients, and particularly those patients that have rare conditions. So each of the CDRNs had to accomplish these goals in the first 18 months of their funding, which just recently ended. We had to, as I mentioned, demonstrate the ability to identify 1 million or more patients across 2 or more health systems. We had to standardize all of our electronic health record data into a common data model. We had to develop processes for how we were going to share data across our own CDRNs and across PCORnet as a whole, and then build infrastructure for being able to implement clinical trials and to support biospecimen banking. And then each CDRN had to demonstrate their capacity by identifying 3 initial cohorts. We all had to do initial work in a weight-related cohort, and then a common condition and a rare condition. For our CDRN, the common condition that we focused on was coronary artery disease, and the rare condition we focused on was sickle cell disease. And then all of this work was really built around the cornerstone of very strong patient and stakeholder engagement. So our CDRN, the Mid-South CDRN, is based at Vanderbilt. Within Vanderbilt, we have electronic health record data on 2.5 million patients. That stretches over the past 15 to 20 years, we have about 1 million active patients that we can access electronic health record data on. We're also partnered with the Vanderbilt Health Affiliated Network, which is 7 health systems that stretch from Western Virginia into Eastern Arkansas and includes about 34 community hospitals and 350 clinics with a total reach of about 3 million patients. And then finally, in phase 1, we're also partnered with Greenway. Greenway is actually an electronic health record vendor, but they have their health record system actually in over 4,000 clinics across the country. And 1,600 of those clinics have signed on to participate in research. So this is another 14 million patients that are actually located across the country. Greenway is based out of Carrollton, Georgia, so they have a large number of clinics in the Southeast, but they have really a national representation of clinics. 50% of these clinics are primary care clinics, and 50% are specialty clinics. But it's all outpatient data. They don't have an inpatient electronic health record system. And then in phase 2, we're expanding our imprint in the Southeast by partnering with Duke and UNC, which will give us another 3 million or so patients in North Carolina, and also Health Sciences of South Carolina, which is 7 health systems in South Carolina, and about another 3 million patients, and this also includes MUSC. I think this is one of the rare times where Duke and UNC actually came together on a single project. So we're very excited to have their engagement. And so in total, our Mid-South CDRN has the potential to pull data together on about 9 million patients in the southeastern United States, as well as an additional 14 million from Greenway. So it's an access to quite a large number of patients that we can get data on. The goal of PCORI really is for these CDRNs to support comparative effectiveness research and pragmatic research. So very interested in doing research that can be embedded into usual care to look at real world questions. This can be things about, optimal therapy, like what's the best second drug for treatment of diabetes, but it also can be system level questions looking at what are the best ways to deliver care, what's the best educational approach. We can potentially randomize at the clinic level or even the hospital level for different studies, and we can even look at health system innovation questions around readmission or other types of issues. And there's really 4 different types of use cases that our CDRNs are designed to support. So we can do research with de-identified data. I mentioned we have the potential to access 23 million patients in our network. We currently have 10 million in our common data model that people could look at. And if people want to do research on de-identified data, that's actually fairly easy to do. So you could do some comparative effectiveness research with that de-identified data. However, there are times where you may need that data to be identifiable. For example, if you want to link to Medicare data or to other claims data where you need the patient's social security number or other identifying information, we actually have the potential to do that as well. And I'm going to talk about that more in a few slides. And then we have the potential to identify patients with a certain condition by looking at our electronic health record data and actually contact that patient to survey them for a cohort or to potentially engage them and enroll them into a pragmatic study. So at Vanderbilt, and this is similar for a lot of the academic centers that are in the PCORnet network, we pull data from many different parts of our health system. We pull it from many different databases around clinic notes, medications, demographics, billing codes, vital signs, and we take all of that data and we put it into a research data warehouse. So we clean that data, we validate that data, and we keep it in a structured research data warehouse. And we keep that data in two different forms. We keep it in a completely de-identified form, which we call the synthetic derivative. So it goes through a one-way hash, and we transform the dates, and it's completely de-identified. But we also still keep it in an identifiable form that we call the research derivative. And then we have tools that sit on top of that research data warehouse to allow it to be used more agilely. So we have some tools that sit on top of the de-identified database, including a record counter tool where you could go in and do very rapid queries like how many patients have diabetes with an A1C between 7 and 9 who are on a certain medicine. And we have a more sophisticated query tool that sits on top of that for more robust queries of de-identified data. This is also where we keep BioView, which is data on about 200,000 patients that we have DNA data banked on. But then we also keep that data sort of in a mirror image in our identified format, and we have tools that sit on top of that as well. So we have a query tool that sits on top of that, and then we have a really fun tool called Subject Locator. So like if you're doing a study and you needed to recruit patients with Crohn's disease as an example, you could go in and put in the criteria, and then with IRB approval and physician engagement, it will pop out where those patients are and when their next clinic appointments are, so you can actually go and meet them in clinic to enroll them into studies at the exact time that they're coming in. And then we have the capacity to take any data that we pull out of our research data warehouse and put it into REDCap for data management and future analysis. So I mentioned BioView, which is our DNA data bank at Vanderbilt. We now have over 200,000 patients with DNA data banked. And then we recently started a new initiative that's called PathLink, where we're trying to do some similar work around pathology tissue. So for PCORI, all of the CDRNs have to create what's called the PCORnet Common Data Model. So we're all taking our electronic health record data and transforming it into the exact same format across the country. So in this way, someone could come to PCORnet and they could run a query or do comparative effectiveness research, and all of the data is formatted exactly the same way. So currently we have about 75 million patients across the country that have been formatted into the common data model. So it's really a large number of patients that we have data on. And you can see these are the data elements that we have in the model right now. So it includes diagnosis data, procedural data, demographics, vital signs, prescription data, particularly dispensing. Prescribing data. Many of us are trying to get dispensing data, which is much harder to do unless you have access to good claims data. I can talk about some of those challenges in the Q&A. But you can see it's not everything, but it's a fairly robust data model for those that want to do comparative effectiveness research, or for those who, I got to keep moving to the center here, or for those that want to use this data model to identify and contact patients for research. And so in our CDRN, we have developed what is called a distributed data model. So we actually have 6 different data marts. So each site, Vanderbilt, the Vanderbilt Health Affiliated Network, Greenway, UNC, Duke, and Health Sciences of South Carolina, has built their own common data model, has a query tool that sits on top of that data model. And if we get a request for a query, each site can run that query. But the data is all in the same common data model, so we're all running the exact same query on the exact same type of formatted data that we can then provide out to an investigator or an organization. And as I mentioned, there's now 60 data marts across the country, representing about 75 million patients. I think one of the really unique things that we're trying to do as PCORnet is to have not only access to EHR data, electronic health record data, but also to have access to claims data. So many people work solely in electronic health record data, or they work solely in claims data, and we're really trying to create a unique opportunity where we have linkage between the two data sources, which can provide just a much more robust view of what's going on with patients and address a lot more issues around data quality and validity. So in our CDRN, as an example, we have developed linkage to our Tennessee state health data. Tennessee collects claims data on 99.5% of all hospitalization and emergency room visits in the state of Tennessee that they collect from the hospitals, and they also get vital statistics, birth certificate and death certificates that go into this database. And they've now given us permission to link our electronic health record data to their claims data. This is really important because usually when we do research at Vanderbilt, for example, we can look in the EHR data and see when a patient's been readmitted to Vanderbilt, but we don't know if they went and got admitted to another hospital in eastern Tennessee. And by linking to this data from the Tennessee Department of Health, we now can know if patients got admitted somewhere else. However, we don't know if they went and got admitted to a hospital in Kentucky or Alabama. For TennCare, which is our Medicaid, we also have linkage. So for our TennCare patients, which is there's almost 1 million TennCare patients in Tennessee, we've gotten permission to link to that data as well. So if a patient is on Tennessee Medicaid and they go to a hospital in Kentucky, we can capture that data. There is some lag time on this data, so that makes it hard for real-time research, but it's very helpful for comparative effectiveness research. And we've also been working directly with Medicare on linkage to Medicare data. So Medicare is really moving quickly to try to make data more rapidly available for research. They've been working directly with PCORnet on this. The goal is to try to have data available with only a 1 to 3 month lag time, and they're also working in the next year to make available not just the fee-for-service data, but also the Medicare Advantage data that we would be able to link to. We also link to our health plan data, so we get all the claims for anyone that's in our Vanderbilt health plan. We've tried to do some work with SureScripts. It's very expensive and very challenging to do, and I can talk about that in the Q&A if there's interest there to get at more dispensing data. We do have some opportunities to link to home health and to nursing homes. We haven't done it yet. In North Carolina, we have some linkage to Blue Cross Blue Shield data, which gives us great access to claims data. And in South Carolina, they also have an all-payer claims database similar to what we have in Tennessee. So we've worked out a governance process where basically we've gotten a lot of these groups like TennCare and the Tennessee Department of Health to agree to link data to our electronic health record data. And they basically have agreed to link it in identifiable form, but then we keep the data similar to our own research data warehouse in both a de-identified form and an identified form, and we have a governance policy around how that data can be used. So for people that want to do work on completely de-identified data, they can do that, and we just give a quarterly report to the group that's sharing the data, whether it's TennCare or the Tennessee Department of Health or our health plan. But if people want to do any work that requires going into identifiable data that's linked to those data sources, we have to get permission from the group that's sharing the data on a project-by-project basis, as well as IRB approvals. We've also built out a lot of novel informatics tools for identifying and contacting patients for research. We've built out an electronic consent process. We've expanded our survey tools. So we now can, I don't know how many of you use REDCap for surveying patients or collecting data, but we have built out the REDCap survey platform. So now, for those of you who are not aware, you can embed videos into REDCap survey. You can embed audio so that it will speak to the patient. We've added an interactive voice response component so that patients can punch in data that goes into REDCap. And we also added all of the PROMIS measures to REDCap, both of the flat PROMIS measures, but also the computer adaptive tests are all in the REDCap library and can be downloaded for use. We've added in an electronic payment process for patients that get enrolled into observational or interventional studies, and we've been working on integration of clinical decision support for when patients get enrolled and randomized into a study. So we've built out different ways to identify and contact patients for research. I mentioned the subject locator tool, which lets us know when a patient's coming into clinic so we can intercept them. We've also are able to engage patients through email. We have 300,000 email addresses at Vanderbilt, and we can potentially contact a patient through email. The challenge there is around patient privacy issues, so we can't directly email someone and say, hey, we've identified you as someone who has, heart disease. Do you want to be in the study? We do it through their physician. So we have to get permission from the physician, and then we can send an email from their physician that says, hey, I want you to know as a patient with heart disease, you may qualify for this study. If you're interested, please click on this link. We do have about 30,000 patients so far who we've contacted, and they've agreed to be directly contacted about future research opportunities. So we're building out within our patient portal something called My Research at Vanderbilt, where anyone can go to that portal and click a box and say, you don't need to contact my doctor first for permission. If you want to do studies with me, you can contact me directly. And for those patients, right now it's 30,000, if we identify that they meet criteria for a study, we can contact them directly. We do a lot of in-clinic recruitment with iPads and kiosks, and I mentioned we can do the interactive voice response. Greenway has a tool that they use called People Link, where when patients first go to the clinic, they actually click their preference for being contacted, whether it's by email, text, or voice, and then that's how they get contacted about potential participation in a study, and the note comes from their doctor, automated. I mentioned stakeholder engagement is a huge part of what we do. So we have stakeholders involved in all aspects of our network. They're on our oversight committee. This is patients and clinicians. Patients are on our advisory council. We have, as co-investigators, we've done stakeholder surveys, we've interviewed clinicians, and then we also do a process called community engagement studios. Some of you may have heard of this before. This started in our CTSA, but any investigator can come to us and say, I'm interested in doing a project in heart disease or something else, and we will actually go out to the community, find patients with the condition of interest. We currently have a bank of about 400 patients that have signed on to this, and we bring them in to a studio session, a 90-minute talk session. It's moderated by an independent facilitator that helps give feedback to the investigator to improve their study from the patient perspective, whether it's improving the consent process, surveys, what are important outcomes that should be measured. It's a great way to get patient feedback about a study. We've published about this, and people can read about that if they're interested. And we've also gone out to a lot of the practices in our network to get them engaged in participating in research. We have a website that people can go to learn more about our research network, and it lists all of the services that we can provide. We can develop and validate computable phenotypes for identifying patients with certain conditions. We can run rapid queries, more sophisticated queries, and support comparative effectiveness and pragmatic research. So I mentioned one of the things we had to do in phase 1 was to demonstrate our capacity by building certain cohorts. So we had to build a weight cohort, a coronary heart disease cohort, and a sickle cell cohort. And this is what we did in the first 18 months. For our weight cohort, we identified an initial group of 300,000 patients, and then we recruited and surveyed patients from Vanderbilt, from the Vanderbilt Health Affiliated Network, and from Greenway, a total of 10,000 patients that we surveyed. And then for our coronary heart disease cohort, we identified 30,000 patients with the condition of interest and surveyed about 2,500 of those. And for sickle cell, we identified and surveyed about 400 families. So for the weight cohort, we started with our full electronic health record database at Vanderbilt, which was close to 3 million patients. And I actually think that should be about, it should be close to 2 million patients, because this is greater than or equal to 18 years of age. And then we narrowed it down to people that have been seen in clinic in the last 5 years. We narrowed it down to people who had 2 or more weight measures and at least 1 height measurement. And we ended up here with about 400,000. I think we excluded people who died and some other things and got down to about 350,000. And then we surveyed a total of about 10,000 patients. And as part of the survey, we asked them about their willingness to participate in future research. So this is the survey tool that we developed. We could email patients a link to this, or we met them in clinic with an iPad. They put their name in and their date of birth, and it checked to see if they were eligible for the study by checking against the query that we had previously run. If they were eligible, we took them to a very basic consent form, because this was a low-risk study. And if they consented, it then took them through the survey on REDCap survey. And at the end of the survey, it took them through a payment process. And just in one day, we blasted this to 10,000 patients from our My Research at Vanderbilt group, and 30% actually responded over the next week. So it was a great way to very rapidly recruit and survey patients for this study. And then this just shows where we got patients from. These use different processes at different places. So like at Vanderbilt, we did some in-person and email consents. Greenway, it was all by email. This is a clinic in the Vanderbilt Health Affiliated Network, which was done all by email to patients as well, to survey 10,000 patients. And you know, different approaches resulted in different response rates. So face-to-face, our recruitment rates were like 70 to 80% or higher. When you get into email, you can see when we go to our My Research at Vanderbilt population, we've already expressed interest in research. Our rates of response are like 30%, but when we just do random patients out in the community and we send them an email, even if it's from their doctor, the response rates are less than 10%. So you're going to get a huge variation in response rate depending on the approach you take. And you know, we also at Jackson Clinic, for example, had 3 different types of letters we sent out. The first one was from the research director of their practice, and then we finally got down to the medical director of their practice. And so as we got closer to the clinician of the patient, the more the response rate improved. This just shows some demographics of the 10,000 patients we recruited into the obesity survey. And I think the exciting thing was, of those that responded, and there's obviously a selection bias here, but there was a lot of interest from them in participating in future research. So a lot of them agreed to be contacted again about future research opportunities. And you can see, you know, half of them even said they would consider participating in a weight-related study where they needed to be admitted to the hospital. So we were surprised at how interested they were in participating in research. And then out of those 10,000 patients, we actually approached 500 and invited them to participate in a mobile app study where we actually put a little mobile app on their phone, and for 2 weeks they put in data about what they were eating, and we linked it to their GPS so we knew where they were when they were eating each meal, and we asked them some questions about how they were feeling while they were eating. And so just in 2 weeks, this is just data at the beginning, you can see 396 patients enrolled, 11,000 meals, huge amounts of data that you can collect very rapidly. This is the work we did with our coronary heart disease cohort. The first thing we had to do for this was develop a computable phenotype, because we really wanted good sensitivity and specificity for identifying our patients. So, you know, we came up with an algorithm for identifying the patients, and we pulled charts, and did some work to look at the sensitivity and specificity of that. And this is actually published online at PheKB. I don't know how many people are familiar with PheKB. It comes from the Emerge network, but we put all of our computable phenotypes that we develop and validate onto that website. So there's a pool of algorithms there for people that want to identify patients with certain conditions. And this was the 30,000 patients we identified just at Vanderbilt that had met criteria for coronary artery disease. And then we did a survey, as I mentioned, of about 2,500 of those patients. Again, we tested various different approaches, whether it was face-to-face, phone, email, mailed letter, mailed survey. This is an older population. You can see the average age was 69. So a lot of them were less interested in engaging through the internet or even through an iPad in the clinic. And when we'd hand them an iPad in the clinic, they'd say, well, just, let's just read it to me, or give me it on paper, or call me at home. So I think this is important when you're working with older populations. You really need to consider some of the challenges around electronic collection of data. So we tried various different approaches to contact with these patients, and you can see we had different response rates depending on the contact approach we use. So face-to-face, we have like an 88% consent rate. Email through the My Research at Vanderbilt, again, 35% rate. Letter, 26%. So it really varies depending on the approach we took to contact the patients. And this is just the characteristics of the patients who wanted to be contacted, whether by letter or mail or phone. So you can see like the email, My Research at Vandy patients are a little bit younger, a little higher SES. And this just shows a little bit about what we learned about these patients. You can see 21% are living alone. 26% told us they miss their meds at least once a week. They have difficulty paying bills. They report a lot of fatigue. So we're collecting a lot of really valuable patient-reported outcomes as part of this survey. Okay, I want to just very briefly mention our relationship with our power, which I mentioned is led by the Global Healthy Living Foundation and UAB. And we collaborated with them to help them be able to identify patients with arthritis-related conditions. And so we first identified a local partner at our site, a clinician, Dr. Bobo Tanner, and then we used a basic query to identify patients of interest. We actually modified that later to make it a little bit more robust because we were getting some false positives. And so we do have the capacity to develop fairly robust algorithms. And then we use that to identify the patients and then contact them. And for this study, we started in certain clinics like our rheumatology clinic, and we're going to go out to our primary care clinics where we send an automated letter from those physicians or from the medical director of that practice. This just shows our counter tool. It's very rapid counts. I just literally real time can go and log into this. Any Vanderbilt investigator can, and I can say I want to find patients with RA or JRA who are on methotrexate, and it popped me out that there was 8,900 patients and gave me sort of the gender and racial background, keeping in mind that our race and ethnicity data is, has some quality issues, as I'm sure most EHR systems deal with that issue. So we identified patients that met criteria for our power. So you can see we found 3,000 patients, just over 3,000 in our My Research at Vanderbilt cohort. We found another 6,000 that was in our rheumatology clinic that we had emails from their patient portal, and another 2,000 that had emails from Epic from when they were registering for appointments. So a total of 11,000 patients that met criteria that we could then contact via email to try to recruit into a study with our power. We developed a letter that came from our director of rheumatology that we could send out to them, and we're actually in the process of implementing this. What we're doing in this study is we send them the letter asking them if they want to participate with Creaky Joints, which is the Our Power website. They go there, they then actually consent through Creaky Joints, and if they consent, we also have the capacity to share that patient's EHR data over to Creaky Joints and Our Power. We have participated in a lot of studies already in the first 18 months. Some of these are studies that come from local investigators. We've had a lot of studies submitted that have gone into review. Some are still in review from other academic centers. We've also done some recent work with industry. And then, as I mentioned, we've been collaborating with these patient-powered research networks. This is just a project we did with a local investigator at Vanderbilt, which is a PCORI-funded study looking at patients with idiopathic subglottic stenosis, so a rare disease where patients have narrowing of the airway. And we developed a mobile app for them where they could record their peak flows every day, and they have a tracking mechanism to look at their peak flows over time, and the data is shared back into REDCap for the study. And then we also helped develop a website for them that has a lot of patient-facing information, as well as a behind-the-scenes site for the investigators. PCORI's funded actually quite a few other trials. Some of you may be aware they funded a large Pragmatic trial looking at aspirin dosing. It's about a $10 to $14 million trial that's going to include 7 of the CDRNs. We're going to actually enroll 20,000 patients looking at optimal dosing of aspirin. We're participating in 2 observational studies looking at comparative effectiveness study on bariatric surgery, looking at different approaches to bariatric surgery and outcomes over time, and another one looking at EHR data, looking at the role of antibiotics in obesity development in kids. And then we've been doing some health system innovation work, and we're working with 5 PPRNs on a demonstration grant application. So I mentioned the aspirin trial because it's the first Pragmatic trial being done by PCORI. We're going to identify 20,000 patients with coronary heart disease and engage them electronically along with their physicians and randomize them to either baby dose or regular strength aspirin to look at what the optimal dose is of aspirin for this population. And we'll be collecting outcomes from patient-reported data and also electronically over the course of the study. So in conclusion, I think PCORnet represents an exciting opportunity to support pragmatic and comparative effectiveness research. We're really building the capacity to be able to access electronic health record data, claims data, and patient-reported data, and it can be a wide array of studies from de-identified research all the way to interventional studies. And investigators can engage individual CDRNs such as ours, individual PPRNs such as our power, but can also have the power to access the entire network to do large national studies. So